Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we begin with something of a hardy perennial for radio phone-in shows, but it is one of those hardy perennials that has come around again. Can I paint a little picture for you, and you promise not to snigger? Can we do that? Okay. Have you ever been on a giant seesaw where you stand on them? You know, like there's one at while we're on the subject, there's a wonderful wildfowl reserve in Norfolk called Pensthorpe, and in the playground there, they've got a massive one. It's like a table on a fulcrum, so you can have sort of 20 people at each end, and it very slowly moves up and down. And I don't know why, but when I saw the grammar school story in the news today, and there's something about the current Prime Minister, Theresa May, that lends weight to the notion that this is going to happen. She seems to be quite an old-fashioned woman. I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, but if life is a seesaw, if Britain is one of those seesaws where it seems to me that people who look ahead, people who are not necessarily young, but who look to the future, have for the last few decades been in charge. They've been at the weighted end of the seesaw. I can't help feeling at the moment that the seesaw's just slightly moving towards people who look back. And it's not just a sort of Brexit reference, but it would also apply to grammar schools and people who somehow think that we have this glorious past, neatly overlooking the fact that we had things like rickets routinely and slums and epic levels of illiteracy and things like that. But because there's this sort of rose-tinted, sepia-tinted view of the past where things were better, and we seem as a society to be moving towards that. I could be wrong, but I'm going to offer that as my first bit of evidence for the belief that Theresa May probably does think that bringing back grammar schools would be a good thing. Now, you don't know yet what question I'm going to ask, so let me give you a quick outline of my interest in this story. I am routinely told by you why academic selection is a bad thing, and at the end of the hour in which you've told me why academic selection by school is a bad thing, I still don't see it. I'm sorry, I kind of sense that you're right, but there's something in my bones that likes academic selection. I think it's because I rarely won running races at school, but occasionally I'd come top of the class in a couple of subjects. So it felt to me at the time as if sort of a degree of, I hesitate to say excellence, but that's the only word we've got, a degree of excellence was being rewarded in the classroom in the way that we routinely rewarded on the playing fields. So, and I could have just got this completely backwards. It always seemed to me that not having academic selection in schools was the same as not giving out medals and not allowing anyone to win races on sports day. That's just my starting position, but it's a slightly selfish one. I also, as a fully paid up member of the category of society called Champagne Socialists, I passionately believe that people born into underprivileged families, people born into environments of little opportunity, need a hell of a lot more help than people like me do in Britain, and indeed people like my children. I know that might sound a little suicidal or self-defeating, but if you're born into a middle-class family with aspirational, educated parents, you're already ahead in life. You've been born 3-0 up, and I know some of those people like to pretend that they've just scored a hat-trick, but generally speaking, you've been born ahead of the herd simply by dint of being born into the kind of family that would move to Kent, in my case, because I live in the southeast, to get into the catchment area for a grammar school. And they don't deliver social mobility. You have an attempt to extrapolate a causal relationship here from a simple fact. Social mobility has gone into decline in this country over the last 30 years. Social mobility at the moment, I would argue, is probably more stagnant than it's been since the Second World War. The likelihood of someone born into the kind of family I've just described breaking through the glass ceilings of class and employment is now smaller than it was when my dad was a lad. Dad left school at 15, ended up on the Daily Telegraph newspaper. That would be impossible now. It simply couldn't happen. Well, I don't think you're allowed to leave school at 15 for a start, just to establish the facts. But the motion, the movement from a bedroom above a pub in Leeds to the editorial floor of the Daily Telegraph is almost non-existent. You'll have a few entrepreneurs, you'll have a few Mike Ashleys who go from a market stall to a massive retail trade, but that's not the same. Those are, if you will, exceptions that prove rules. So you've heard Michael Wilshire talking to Nick Ferrari, the Chief Inspector of Schools, expressing his dislike of grammar schools. David Willits, the man with two brains who was at the heart of coalition education policy, has this morning reminded us that they don't provide social mobility, and yet I still can't quite combine these positions to conclude that they shouldn't open any more. Circumstances in which you could approve of more grammar schools being opened would surely be stick it in some of the most deprived areas in town. How long would it take the sharp-elbowed middle classes to move into those deprived areas? I don't know, but they wouldn't move in overnight. How could they work in a way that would genuinely provide social mobility? Because unless we can identify a way in which they would genuinely provide social mobility, then you're left in that really peculiar position that so much of British politics seems to be in at the moment, where people have been successfully persuaded to vote against their own interests because they've been conned into believing that a vote for unfairness will actually benefit them. I mean, wherever you look, the doctors' strike is a very good example, actually. I told you public opinion would start to slide away once the big guns of Rupert Murdoch and the Daily Mail and their anti-union rhetoric got into place. And we're seeing it slide away at the moment, hopefully not terminally. But, here's the thing. You like grammar schools, despite the fact you probably wouldn't have got into one. Somehow we can kid ourselves that if we vote for an unfair system, we would be on the right side of the unfairness. This, in a way, is what you could call your working class Tory. The people who've been successfully for generations now persuaded to vote for an unfair system because they somehow think they're on the right side. Like austerity. Number of calls we took, you remember, from people saying, well, I voted for cuts, but I didn't realise they were going to affect me. Something like 70-odd% of people who were in favour of austerity were also simultaneously persuaded that it wouldn't affect them. So you like grammar schools because you somehow think that some people are going to get an advantage, and we can all be conned into thinking it will be us. Well, it won't be. Even if they only take 10%, that's 90% of us who won't. If they take 20%, that's 80% of us. 49.999% recurring of the population are of below average intelligence. 49.999 recurring % of the population are of below average intelligence. I said it twice because it takes a moment for the penny to drop on that one. Of course they are. Average intelligence is going to be exactly the midpoint. So most of us will not get into grammar schools. Most of our children will not get into grammar schools. And the advantage that grammar schools convey to the children that do get into them, in a way, puts the icing on the cake of the cleverness they've already got. So I can see all the arguments against them. But I still like the idea of academic selection. And I can still read the data from Finland and other Scandinavian countries where they teach all children identically and they don't do any streaming or any academic selection and they get better overall results. And I still can't see it because I just have this image of a clever kid whose brains are rotting in a rubbish school, and society should be doing something to rescue that clever kid and make the most of their potential. So that's where I stand on grammar schools. I know that the statistics don't support the idea that they provide social mobility, but I believe in principle they could. I want to know how you think society can take a poor child from an underprivileged house and somehow bring her into the world of elite education. 12 after 10 is the time. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. I can't think of anything worse than moving to Kent to get my kid into a school full of people like me. Absolutely no prospect of that whatsoever. But academic selection, just purely and simply, tell me why it's a good thing, a bad thing, or somewhere in between thing. Joanna is in St Albans. Joanna, what would you like to say?
Hello. Your questions throw me because I actually came with another question, which is why you attracted to grammar schools. And
academic selection in principle.
Well, we moved our children from an area where the local school, my son would have been annihilated. He wouldn't have lasted a minute. So we moved to a successful, it's in the top 100 school.
Why would your son have been annihilated?
Because he's a very gentle soul. Listen, as a parent, when it comes to year 6, you become a headless chicken. We moved in year 5, friends told me you should look for schools in Year 5. We started tutoring for the exam in Year 5.
But this, in a way, I understand why you've been thrown by my question, because you're sort of proving the cliches that I just made about you are a sharp-elbowed middle-class parent who wants your son to have advantages denied to the children at the school where he would have been annihilated.
I agree with you, because I think...
See, I don't want to be like you.
Yeah, but the problem is, when it comes to social mobility, and when it comes to your child, I think sometimes social mobility goes out of the window.
Hey, but no, because social mobility doesn't involve your child. Your social mobility is poor children.
Yeah, but well, I agree that in theory, I agree 100% of poor children. So our school
You don't agree 100% because you're supporting a system that entrenches the divisions. The kids who I'd like to see go to the schools that you describe are the kids who are doing the annihilating, the ones who really need help, the ones who really need their potential to be harnessed. And it's not academic selection at the moment. That's the point you've made. I appreciate it's not why you rang in. It's not academic selection. It's social engineering. It's people born with advantages, like your children and my children, getting even more advantages by going to grammar school. I hate that, for the record. It's the sort of latest chapter in the story of people developing allergies to the modern world. Grammar schools are the next big thing from the past that we might bring back in the forlorn hope of somehow, I don't know, improving things. But academic selection makes sense. Do it everywhere else. You pick a football team at school with the best players in it. Everyone else is allowed to play football, but you're not going to win trophies unless you put the best players in your team. What is the difference between putting your best students in the same school and bringing them up to the highest achievable level, as long as you also ensure that the kids in the other schools are getting a good education as well? Marnie is in Plymouth. Marnie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James. First time caller, a bit nervous.
Don't be, it's only me.
It's only you, right. I go back to being a grammar school pupil in the late 60s when my dad was a potato deliverer.
Yes.
My mum worked in the factory, in Rover Factory in Tyseley in Birmingham. Both left school at 14. And I was fortunate enough to pass 11 plus and go to a grammar school. Where I lived, there were 6 grammar schools and 4 high schools.
Birmingham had loads, didn't it? Still does, but they're fee-paying.
It was actually Solihull.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved to Shirley, and, I don't know if you know it. But
I do, yes. I grew up in Kidderminster.
Oh, right, not far away.
Exactly.
So I went to grammar school. I felt a little bit different from other children, maybe.
Socially.
A little bit different, yes. But it wasn't meant to sort of preclude me from working academically. And I managed to go to Bristol University, and then I've gone on to be the head of 5 international schools. So
you are the poster girl for grammar schools?
I suppose I am. But I would just like to say that it's supply and demand. If you limit the supply of grammar schools, inevitably you're going to have people who have got a vested interest with tuition, with house prices, etc., moving into certain areas.
Yes.
If you expand the provision of grammar schools, then you bring in people like myself who really wouldn't have had a chance, and we would have just been, trolling along and just...
But that is when there's no prospect whatsoever of returning to what you describe. The amount of grammar schools that would need to open would be insurmountable. But what percentage was it then? Do you know, roughly?
I don't know, actually, but, if it's 6 to 4, you can work it out. You can do the math, as they say, yourself.
Was it that much?
Yeah, absolutely.
40% of children went to grammar school?
No, 40% went to high school.
And 60% went to grammar schools?
Yeah.
More than half?
Yes, indeed.
Well, then that's not academic selection, really. Because that means that people of below average intelligence are going there.
Well, we were streamed also when we went to grammar school. So, there were various streams, and you could write...
And as a headmistress, when you say you ran international schools, were you as a headmistress rather than a bean counter?
Well, I worked in Germany, where there is still a kind of grammar school system.
And I suppose when you see this, statistically, you see that in Kent, for example, if you're middle class, you've got a 50% chance of getting in. If you're not, you've got a 10% chance.
Exactly.
How do you help the kids that are really clever, kids like you now, the modern equivalent of Marnie, the 21st century Marnie at the age of 11? Because they're not going to get into grammar schools, and if you build more, they're probably not going to get into those ones either because of callers like our first one. Mothers and I've got no beef with them. the sharp-elbowed aspirational middle-class mums and dads are going to get their kids into the schools.
Well, it's very difficult to turn the clock back.
Yes.
I really do feel...
It's a bit late to point that out, Marnie.
I feel that there was a massive dismantling of a...
Yes.
Which was a good education system and allowed people like myself...
Well, no, I'm going to take issue with that, because the reason they abolished grammar schools, and I mean, all of the research backed this up, was because the majority of children were being let down by the education system.
I take issue with those statistics.
Well,
I think
you're a
Shirley
teacher,
Williams
you can't
had a
take issue with
interest.
statistics.
Well, yes, there are statistics and blind statistics.
Well, that's true. That's true. But everyone who went to grammar school obviously argues that they were very good for them, which is what you're doing. You're not arguing that it's very good for society.
No, I am arguing it's very good for society, because I feel that people who've got potential are being let down by the system now.
But it won't be people with potential. I'm sorry to hector you. It isn't people with potential that are benefiting from grammar schools at the moment. It was when you went. Arguably, it's people with money.
Yeah, indeed, and I agree that.
So where do we build a new one?
We should be building new ones. We should be expanding. In every city, in every town, we should be expanding the grammar school system. I had to take my daughter out of the British system and put her into a school abroad in order that she would be able to flourish.
And if we bring back lots of grammar schools, a majority of British children will be at a school that's even worse than the one you had to take your child out of.
No, not a majority.
Yes, no, they will. With the greatest of respect, you've got that wrong. There was never a period in history where more children went to grammar schools than went to secondary moderns. I will charge myself with the task of establishing what the percentages are. I don't know what they are at the moment, but I'd imagine it's sort of 10-20%. Otherwise, you can't use a word like elite. If more than half of children go there, then you've got children of below average intelligence getting in. And this has always been, to me, a practice designed to polish the potential of the children with the highest levels of intelligence. Marnie, thank you so much. It's 25 after 10. Rob's in Sutton. Rob, amaze me.
Hi, James. I wanted to, first of all, just quickly, I attended a grammar school in Kent, and my school's attitude was very much that, it seemed to me, that there were enough kids in every year group at my school who were capable of...
Mate, do I have your undivided attention at the moment, or are you trying to do something else at the same time?
I literally was plugging my charger.
Yeah, all right. Well, you have one more go, but concentrate. There's 750,000 people listening, and they're more important than your phone charger.
Okay. My school's attitude was that there were a handful of kids in every year group who, if you gave them a syllabus at the start of year 10 and just left them to it, they'd probably be able to pull 10 A's out at GCSE in a year and a half's time. The rest of us were left to sink. Thanks to my dad, who was a teacher, and some extra tuition I got from him at home, I did manage to produce some decent grades, but I'm utterly convinced I would have done much, much better at a comprehensive.
Really?
Absolutely.
Because you'd have been above average at a comprehensive?
Yes. I would have been a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and they would have pushed me much harder.
11's very young as well, of course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did your dad teach in a comprehensive school or a grammar school?
He taught in a comprehensive. That through the 70s and 80s, when he was first there, it was widely regarded as a really good school. Now that was in the days of the 13 plus in Kent, when kids would take their entrance exam in the second year. So you've got all these kids who might have some potential academically, but didn't have a lot of direction, who are mixing in a peer group with kids who did have that direction, who then went off to grammar school, and these kids are left behind. They've got some extra direction from their peers, and they managed to produce some decent results. Quite a few of these kids went off to university. I actually played cricket with one of my dad's former pupils, who had gone all the way through this comprehensive and was an investment banker and was earning massive amounts of cash.
And that is a journey that is less likely to be undertaken by someone who's 11 today than it was by your generation, and I suspect my generation as well. And that's the problem, isn't it? Is that you want to increase social mobility, and you presume that because grammar schools have been in decline while social mobility has been in decline, that somehow bringing back grammar schools would improve social mobility. I'm not convinced of that. And my problem is I still like the idea of academic selection, but that's a bit like I don't know, choosing the weapons in a duel. Academic selection would have suited me as a kid. If they'd been choosing people according to good looks or speed on the running track, I'd have been right at the bottom of the class. But they didn't. They chose people according to academic performance in exams, and that suited me down to the ground. So I don't know. I just don't know where the social mobility comes from in the modern environment. And I just hear lots of right-leaning people who would not get into these schools voting for them because they just quite like the idea of unfair advantages and have been persuaded that they would benefit from them. I like the sound of your dad as well. Rob, thank you for accepting my telling off about your phone charger with such good grace. Sidak is in Birmingham. Sidak, I can give you 63 seconds. What would you like to say?
Pardon me, sorry?
You've got 60... Well, no, now you've got 54 seconds. What would you like to say?
Essentially, the idea that the argument in terms of more grammar schools or less grammar schools, I come from a state comprehensive and from Birmingham, Perry Beecher School, which was sort of the poster boy for what would you call it? Sorry, schools. I forgot the word. Because essentially, my school, my comprehensive school, provided me with the opportunities to have a sort of social cohesion, because I'm not originally from this country,
right.
And those skills in the social ladder, not in terms of class, but in terms of community, helped me essentially.
And what makes you think you wouldn't get those at a grammar school?
Because my friend, I had friends from
very quickly, just in a sentence.
From my the
this isn't going to work, is it? Up until I apologise. I should have come to you after the news. That little phrase in a sentence, as I uttered it, Sidak, I realised it was a phrase that possibly is not one that was likely to deliver much fruit in your case. Why not bring back grammar schools? The policy editor at Newsnight, Chris Cook, has written a superb piece on the BBC website that's well worth a read. I know Chris, and he really is, he won't mind me saying, positively anaraki when it comes to these sort of issues. I'll retweet that article, and then we'll return to the simple question of how more grammar schools would provide more social mobility, which is what Theresa May has told us she wants, when at the moment all they really do is provide a quasi-private education for free to people who could probably have afforded the private education in the first place. This, it's uncited actually, but I think it's probably from The Anatomy of Britain by Anthony Sampson, published 1962. 1/3 of children proceeded to grammar or technical schools, large majority of whom stayed at school until at least the age of 16, when they sat nationally recognised O-level exams. Many continued in sixth form studies up to the age of 18, when they sat A-level exams. About 1/4 of all grammar school pupils proceeded to university. The remaining 2/3 of children faced a starkly contrasting school experience, with a typical modern school student leaving school at the minimum leaving age of 15 with no school qualifications, which actually brings me back to my own father, who I mentioned in my introduction. He didn't go to grammar school. He left school at 15 with no qualifications, but he ended up as a journalist on the Daily Telegraph because of social mobility, not because of grammar schools. Social mobility is the worst it's ever been. There is no point in the 20th century, certainly since the Second World War and the 21st century, when it's been a worse time in Britain to be young and poor. Why would bringing back grammar schools help those children when all the research shows at the moment the schools are packed to the gills, rammed to the rafters, with the kids of sharp-elbowed, aspirational, middle-class cliches like me? Dominic's in Camberwell. Dominic, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I actually don't think that grammar schools should be brought back, but I do think selective education is a good idea, and I'm glad you make the distinction between what was... I'm
trying to. I'm groping in the dark, yeah. Dominic, but thank you for noticing.
I think part of it is having good options for those who are going to be leaving school later on. I remember reading an article a few years ago talking about, it was A.A. Gill actually, and he was saying that when he was 16, the options were so much broader.
Yes.
He obviously didn't go to grammar school because he's severely dyslexic, but the point was is that at 16 he could have, the options were A-levels, it could have been a technical college, it could have been an apprenticeship, it could have been going into the city, it could have been working for a company. All these things offered different ways of
what is it now?
Where he wants to be.
What is it now?
Whereas nowadays it's all university, and that's all you're ever told. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that you have children who are all put into one class, taught exactly the same thing, essentially the skills they need to get in order to go to university. But of course, not every job needs university, and not everybody wants to go to university. And I think that's part of the problem. I think we should have academic selection.
That's a really good point.
Not based on who's cleverer and who's stupid, but based on aptitudes and what people want to do. I suppose what people would call the vocational or the technical one. So that those who do need to go to university, doctors, lawyers, whatnot, teachers, can go to universities, and everybody else should be able to have broad, clear options.
Yes, but they wouldn't need the same. They wouldn't need the same education. So why not separate them at the ages of 11 or 13?
Well, this is what I mean. I agree with that. I just don't think that using the phrase grammar school makes it sound retrograde.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be retrograde. I think it's just a case of saying...
Well, I think you're trying to have... Yes, but not in the same schools. So you've got to call them something. You just don't like the title grammar because of its sort of nostalgia. It's the same reason why so many people do like it.
It's not the title. I just think that it doesn't... Well, I think it makes a lot of people think of the past. But I'd also say that it would serve quite a different purpose as well. The fact that you pass the 11 plus suddenly means that you can go on to a grammar school and have a completely different, career prospect. I don't agree with. I think that if somebody, for example, programming is a new thing that didn't exist back when grammar schools were there. Now, with programming, I would argue you don't need to go to university to learn computer science.
And again, we need to modernise the word vocational, because, of course, people think of the trades quite often when that is uttered, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that, and we could do with more.
You can make a lot of money from being a plumber.
No, of course you can. I was with Charlie Mullins the other day, the fellow that founded Pimlico Plumbers, and he's got more money than the rest of the people listening to this programme put together, so there's no doubt. But also, vocational could be coding, it could be just a very specific skill-based thing. I mean, you make some excellent points, but you wouldn't get any of them past a politician because they're too complicated and thought-provoking, which is why the grammar school thing is peak elderly right-wing politics. Just because 75% of people wouldn't get into them. And, that's bad news for 75% of people. Michael Wilshire himself said, a grammar school in every town is the call. And what everybody forgets is if you've got a grammar school in every town, you've got 3 secondary moderns, where the average student emerged at the age of 15 with no qualifications. That's why they got rid of them. Kind of makes sense when you put it like that. At least I think it does. Dominic, thank you. I'm cracking on because so many people want to talk about this. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need if you want to grab the phone line that Dominic has just vacated. Sue's in Sevenoaks. Sue, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. I've had two sides of the coin. I've had 2 children. One of them went to grammar school. We're ordinary parents, hairdresser and a policeman. And we haven't, earned loads of money, but we came to a little village just outside Sevenoaks, and my daughter was naturally very bright. And
it's about a 20% premium on property prices in that part of the country, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose so.
So you're way above average when it comes to finances.
Yeah, I don't think, though, that people that aspire to do well should be demonised.
Everybody aspires to do well. It's just that not everybody can afford to move to areas with a 20% property premium built upon the existence of schools.
That's right, but we didn't have our head in that brain box at that time, and so we were very lucky, and we aspired to push ourselves and do well. But anyway, my daughter was naturally bright, and she did go to a grammar school. I'd like to have paid for her to go to private, but we just couldn't afford it. So grammar school really was a natural place for her to go and exceed, which she did exceed.
Yes, but it was only a natural place because of where you lived.
Yeah,
and because of your own financial and social status. And it's interesting you use the word penalised. I hear this a lot. We shouldn't penalise aspirations. So what you're saying is that the normal experience of 75% of children in a country with more grammar schools, 75% of children would be punished.
Okay, well, if I spin the coin back, I was actually born in Catford, and that wasn't a very...
Is this the sympathy vote now, Alison?
No, not at all. I know what you're trying to do. Anyway, I was born in Catford, and I wasn't a very bright person at all, and I'm really happy to admit that. I'd failed my 11 plus. I didn't get to a grammar school, but there were grammar schools in my area, and the bright kids went to them. When I went to a comprehensive school, they were actually, there's an A, B, and C stream in, and luckily for me, I don't know how, but I got into the A stream.
Well, there is not. You don't know how. You clearly were of above average intelligence within your school, but you're ducking the point. You said it yourself. You said we penalise everybody else.
We are demonised. I do think we are demonised for trying to do well. And
I don't know who you think demonises you.
Well, some politicians do, and people do.
How are you demonised when it's pointed out that only people who can afford to move into areas with inflated property prices can get into the schools that you describe? How is that penalising you? That's a description of fact.
Yes, I know, but I think naturally society does have clicks that happen naturally.
I just find it astonishing that people born with all the advantages you've described your children being born with feel that they're being penalised, and the children born with none of those advantages are not being penalised.
Well, okay, where do all these girls and boys go then that are naturally really bright? Where do you put them? If they go
now, they go nowhere. Now they go nowhere, or they go around in circles, unless they're lucky enough to have parents who can afford to move into a catchment area for a grammar school. And that's why 50% of children like yours will get into a grammar school in Kent, but in the same county, the children living in poor households goes down to 10%. And you still say that you think you're being penalised, don't you?
No, actually, I don't. I'm lucky. I worked hard and I did what I had to do.
Oh, heavens above, the parents of the children who are never going to get into grammar schools work hard as well. They just don't earn as much money as the middle class parents do. Alison, I understand your position. A lot of people feel it, that somehow we punish aspiration in this country. We don't. That's the phrase politicians put in the mouths of voters when other people describe what unfair advantage looks like. Oh, it's penalising those of us who aspire. No, it's penalising unfair advantage. A level playing field admits no penalties. Sue's in Sevenoaks. Aha, more Kent. Sue, what would you like to say? Oh, that was Sue. Alison's in Crawley. Alison, what would you like to say?
James, well, I sort of agree with you on what you
I don't know what I think. How can you agree with me?
Okay. What I think about grammar schools is that when you make the bar to get into grammar school about what a child has achieved so far, you naturally disadvantage children who either have parents who don't care.
Yes.
Or who are too busy, or who don't have enough money to buy extra support.
We're not supposed to feel sorry for those children. We're supposed to feel sorry for Sue, who's being penalised for aspiring and aiming high for her children.
But if the objective is not just to please a load of sort of, middle class voters, if the objective is to actually identify the bright kids, there is no problem with doing that. We can make the bar judging a child on its potential ability.
So a different exam, a different sort of...
Absolutely. If we judge on potential ability, then we will identify those children who have who have the potential to really do great things, and we can take them off. And that actually, why this will never come in.
That's what I want.
Politically, why this will never come in is because politically, that would be a system that no parent would be able to manipulate in any way whatsoever.
This is John Rawls's, what's it called, the veil of ignorance, where we build our society without knowing anything about our place in it. So you sort of have a kind of utilitarian outlook where you sort of think, well, I'm in favour of long sentences for murderers, but I might actually be a murderer, so maybe we shouldn't be executed. I love that. And the idea of education, you would do the same, and it would lead to a system where everybody had an equal chance of doing well. But what would that exam look like?
Well, there are loads of academic. I mean, don't ask. But I used to be a school governor for years. But we used to look at them within the school as to how you identify children's potential. And I've not researched it to.
See, but this is the thing, because anything that involves a test. Anything that involves a test, you automatically give an advantage to the kind of kids whose parents are going to pay people to teach them how to do those tests. Even IQ tests have technique.
No, you don't. No,
really?
You don't. It's not the sort of test you can coach for. It is identifying potential. So it is not saying, well, yeah, do you know what? This kid's great at maths, because they've been coached for ages. It's actually identifying their potential. So it's not something you can coach towards. And as I said,
I'm going to take your word for that, aren't I?
Well, yeah.
Because I said, tell me what it looks like, and you can't tell me. I will sign up when I'm king. I will absolutely bring you in as education minister if you can show me what that test would actually look like, the way to identify, irrespective of all other signifiers and attributes, irrespective of education even, just some sort of test for raw potential. Then set up all the grammar schools you want. If you've definitely got the 25% with the most potential, give them an education geared towards their skills and abilities. And then we're left, Alison, with the question of what we do with the other 75%. But of course, the nature of this sort of right-wing rhetoric is to be utterly blind to what happens to the other 75%. You just need to persuade 51% that they're going to be in the top 25%, and you've won the vote. And you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The grammar school question is it's almost as old as education itself in Britain, certainly in living memory. Why is it so politically toxic? Answer: because it essentially consigns 75% of kids to a scrap heap at the age of 15. That's the rhetoric. Is it true? And is that a price worth paying for taking the 25% who do so well as a result? Angelique is in Bristol. Angelique, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Well, my husband's grandfather came from very, humble roots. He started off as a tea boy. His son was exceptionally bright, and in primary school, his school teacher recognised this and put him forward for the Bolton Grammar School. His father couldn't afford it, but it was all paid for. And a long story short, Dave's dad, he graduated with a PhD in applied mathematics by the age of 21, lived, a wonderful life, which wouldn't have been possible had his teacher not recognised his potential. And he represents, I think, a good example of what it means to recognise and nurture potential in children.
It does, but we're back to the case study problem, aren't we, here? In that, of course, finding anyone from a humble background who was plucked into a grammar school and has gone on to academic greatness is a wonderful argument as to why grammar schools were good for that individual and the individuals like them. But what about the 75% of kids in that class? What about the one who just missed out? What about the 75% who didn't get the educational opportunities? And just off the top of my head, let's just pretend that half of them would have benefited enormously from the kind of education he received. What do we say to them? Tough? Suck it up? Move on?
Well, no, definitely not. What about looking at our education system and improving it for all? Currently, we have a system that is just mediocre. It's mediocre. It just lets children, continue on to the next year. We just pass children whether they've learned something or not. I mean, we face secondary school children who can barely add up.
This is my fear. You've absolutely nailed my fear, which is that by building more grammar schools, you would make the situation for everybody left behind even worse than it is already.
Yeah, well, we need to improve. We need to do something. We can't continue as we are. I'm not saying that grammar schools is the only way forward, but we need a better system that recognises...
No, grammar schools is a way backwards. If you're really interested in improving the educational system for everybody, grammar schools would be a way backwards. But this is my personal problem, my moral problem, if you will, in that there would be a way forwards, if you could do it right, for children from a humble background possessed of a great potential. And I don't know why. I don't know whether it makes me a sort of fascist. I can live with that. The 25% of the cleverest kids in the country go to these schools. Build them tomorrow. But it won't be. I don't know how you can make sure that it is. It will be 25% of the kids in this country lucky enough to be born with wealthy, aspirational, sharp-elbowed parents. How do you avoid that? I don't know. Bill's in Harlow. Bill, do you know?
Not a clue, James, but I just want to take issue with a caller about 15 minutes ago, and to quote him word for word. And the reason I phoned up is the gentleman said the school system is all geared towards university.
He was a teacher.
Sorry?
He was a teacher.
But he's wrong, because, and I'll tell you why he's wrong, James. I'm a parent. I've got an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. Our 18-year-olds, they're in an academy school. I'm in Bishop Stortford, actually, not Harlow. But in Bishop Stortford, there really isn't a bad school.
It's just put 50 grand on the price of your house, that distinction, hasn't it, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. But the point is, the school had about 20 million quid thrown at it, and the headmaster was very, very canny. He spent it all. And then they have two streams at that school. They have a stream for kids that want to do A-levels and go on to university, but they also have a stream for kids that want to go into the workplace. And when my son, the 18-year-old, was coming up to do his GCSE choices, and now they have it 3 years, not 2, he actually had the option to do the IMI, the International Motor Industry thing, and he went in to do vehicle maintenance, and he came out 2/3 of the way qualified as an apprentice, and now he's in the local Audi dealership 3 years into his first part of the apprenticeship. And my second son has just got a place up at Cambridge Regional College. He didn't want to go on to university, and he's just literally yesterday started a design course for IT. So
that sounds like what you want to be reflected on a national level. It doesn't actually contradict what the earlier caller said, because what you have here is perhaps an example of something that doesn't fit into the broader truth about the system, and the system is probably best described by that ambition of Tony Blair's to see 50% of people going on to tertiary education, going on to university, and that is, obviously that means 50% won't, and that's your kids, but the idea that university is the goal of the system holds true in most schools. I like the sound of your boys' school, though, I've got to be honest, and I think that was what the last caller was driving at, until she sort of fell into that trap of thinking, or rather of saying, I want all schools to be improved for all children, but until they are, I think I'll send mine to a grammar school. Sasha is in Greenhithe. Sasha, everyone's in Kent today. What would you like to say?
Well, we're a family who are a couple of years' time going to have to make that decision around whether we spend a phenomenal amount of money on private tuition to get our son through the 11 plus. Now, we're sharp-elbowed, middle-class family, and we're probably two graduates who can probably afford to do it.
Yeah.
But we've got a real hard choice where unless we pay, the only people who get rich from grammar schools in Kent are private tutors.
Sure.
We've got a choice, which is we spend a lot of money to get him into a grammar, or effectively we put him into a secondary modern, because that's what's happened to the comprehensive schools in Kent. They've been left to rot. So probably our choice, if he doesn't get into a grammar, would be to send him back into London, and to send him into a comprehensive system in London, which has had the investment in high-quality leadership and high-quality teaching. And London is a really, really good example of where, if you invest the money into a comprehensive system, it works really, really well.
Things are going really well in London, but we don't hear much about it because it doesn't sell papers, it doesn't sell tickets for the Ghost Train. Did you move to Kent especially?
No, we moved to Kent because we could afford a property in Kent. So that was our choice. We both lived in Greenwich before.
But it wasn't for the schools. You weren't looking down the railroad.
No, and it was quality of life more than anything. We were looking, and we couldn't afford the property we would have wanted in London. So, but I
you are. Well, what's the time? I've probably got time for one more caller after this. But you are the absolute beginning, middle, and end of this issue, aren't you? Your personal experience is grammar, because and I really salute your honesty, because it often is missing from these debates. And with the greatest of respect, I think your honesty is probably born of the fact that you don't know which way the cards are going to fall in the next couple of years. If he gets into grammar school, great. Everyone's a winner.
Yeah.
But of course not everyone is. We just don't care because our kid has got in. So all the people who ring me from Kent to tell me how great grammar schools are completely avoiding the fact that they might not get in. And if they don't get in, that's a really bleak picture that you paint. And that is true for, I don't know what the percentages are in Kent, but when it was a nationwide practice, it was 75% of the children were getting left out, getting left behind.
Yeah, we send him either gets into Dartford or Wilmington Grammar, and that's a great experience for him.
Sure.
Or he ends up at Lee Technical College in Dartford, which is, the difference in 5 A to C passes is 90% at Wilmington or 35% at Lee.
And that's your choice, and that's how that's what I mean by lazy right-wing rhetoric. So people listening to this who somehow think that they're winners, 75%. There's a 3-to-1 chance that they won't be, and yet that's what the Tories do, isn't it? They get you to vote against your own interests because they've kidded you into thinking you're going to be one of the 25% that win.
And our choice will be, probably, if he doesn't get into grammar, is to put him on a train to Eltham or
getting back into London. Well, it's odd, as a human being, I say to you, I hope he gets in. I really do. As a sort of fellow parent, I say I hope he gets in. But obviously, if you're trying to see the bigger picture of the country, you have to recognise you've just described a system that actually stinks, and we're back where we always are at the end of this hour. I have not got any arguments against academic selection if you could find some way of truly testing it. Just potential, truly testing it. But what did Sasha just tell us? They're spending half their income, they're spending a fortune on private tuition. Everybody is, to get their kids into these schools. So it's not social mobility that's being promoted. It's an already established advantage being embellished further. But I guess there is a possibility that you can persuade 51% of people that they will be in the 25% and then get the vote through.